So good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar with Oxford Biodynamics. Apologies for starting a few minutes late. We had a couple of technical issues, but I think we're now all live. We're just going to wait a few moments for everyone to join the webinar. And while we're waiting, I just point you to a poll that's on the screen at the moment asking if you're a shareholder of Oxford Biodynamics. And if you get a chance, if you could just complete that poll, that would be really helpful. Can I just say a few points of administration before we start, just to let you know that everyone is on listen-only mode. If you do want to ask a question, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and if you could type your questions in there, we'll endeavour to get through as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. The format for today is a presentation which will last about 25-30 minutes from Chairman Matthew Wakefield and the new Chief Exec, Jon Burrows. We're delighted to have them both with us today. So I think that's probably enough of the administration. I think we've got a lot of people have arrived. Looking at the split of attendees, it's a roughly 50-50 split between shareholders and non-shareholders. So I'm going to end that poll, and without further ado, I am going to hand over to Matthew Wakefield, who is the chair of Oxford Biodynamics, and I'm going to ask Jon Burrows if he could just share his screen. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex, very much. Good afternoon, everyone. As Alex said, I'm the new chairman of OBD. I was appointed in December last year. Just a very brief sort of resume of myself. I've worked in the city for the last 35 years. I was originally a fund manager and then moved over to broking in the late 80s and had been in the financial markets all my life. My association with Oxford Biodynamics goes back a long time. I was introduced to the company some 11 years ago when I met Sasha, the scientist behind the technology. I was just basically blown away by it. What's been really interesting is that over those last 10 years, everything Sasha said has come to fruition, and the technology has been proven many, many times over. The really exciting thing about my appointment is it comes at a juncture where Jon's just joined. He joined last March, and I do sincerely believe we're right on the precipice of this brilliant technology being commercialized. And Jon's got a very clear game plan on how the commercialization is going to take place. So I'm going to hand over to Jon. He can give a brief history of himself and the new strategy for the company. And I hope you enjoy it all.
Thank you, Matthew. I hope everybody can see the screen, and thank you for all joining. So I joined this company in March, very end of March last year. And of course, immediately the pandemic struck, which sort of put the kibosh on a lot of the ideas I had. And I can really echo Matthew in the fact that as soon as I met Dr. Akulovich, we know as Sasha, and saw what him and the team had been building and working on, I just knew it would be a game changer. And so my background is, although I live in the US, I was born in the UK. I came to the US back when I was in my early 20s. I'm a chemist by training, and then became a molecular biologist, did my PhD in molecular biology, got into clinical research, and then worked in pharma companies discovering drugs, doing drug discovery, flipped over to translational medicine, ended up doing a lot of work with diagnostics, and that's when I got into the business of science. And I think for me, understanding that scientists and medics really need to drive the business of science was when it all made sense. And I was working for Ventana Medical Systems when they got bought by Roche. We're working with Big Pharma to take their drug programs and make companion diagnostics to help determine who would really benefit from their drugs. And that was really becoming successful. So after Roche bought Ventana Medical Systems, I was headhunted out to the East Coast of America. And there I took over the R&D and then the business development, and then became the CEO of a very small company that did proteomics, cutting edge technology. We ended up commercializing it, selling that company. And that was in 2015. After that, I think the best thing to say is became a consultant, went to private practice. I just couldn't find a good company that I wanted to work for. So I worked with people on their good ideas, helping them to get them funded and to move them along. At the end of 19, I met Oxford Biodynamics, and at the immunology meetings in Washington, DC, I was out there and I met with Sasha and his team with their poster on the IO test. And I realized that this was a modality of genomics and a test which absolutely had to see the light of day commercially. So fast forward to the end of March, and I came on board with the big idea of putting that universal IO test into the commercial market in the US for OBD. And of course, everything shut down because of the pandemic. So let me tell you the story of what's happened since then, past the disclaimer, and just recap very quickly. We are leaders in precision medicine with 3D gene regulation. And when I get to the IP slide, you'll see how we really do have a commanding position in this market. Started as the University of Oxford spin out in 2007. We are publicly traded, as you know, on the AIM. Our first two products, which I'm going to talk a lot about today, the COVID-19 Severity and the Universal IO test, and at this time fully funded and currently being deployed. As Matthew pointed out, we restructured in March 2020 to pivot from R&D to commercial. And I was brought on board. I've hired some commercial team in the US. This platform that we're working with is not just highly accurate, as you'll see from our COVID test, but it's demonstrated robust class stratification of clinical outcome and prognosis. We are a global company. Our corporate HQ and core lab is in the UK. We have a commercial team in the US, and we have a reference lab in Asia. So as pioneers of the 3D regulation of the human genome, we have created a valuable technology portfolio that includes the world's largest curated 3D genomics database. What does that mean? What that means is, as we build our tests on our arrays and boil them down to the qPCR test that then gives us a binary readout of the question that we're asking, we go through all of the systems biology, all of the biochemistry of mechanism of action, and the 3D gene loci that are involved in that. And we understand in relation to the rest of the genome what that means. And we curate that, and that's the basis of a lot of what we do and a lot of what we do with pharma companies. This was all built on the custom biomarker arrays that we've developed, the proprietary bioinformatic tools that we continue to build, and has resulted in a pipeline of deployable molecular diagnostic tests that are boiled down to qPCR tests, which, as you know, are qPCR is commoditized in the market. Any clinical lab can run a qPCR test. And this is protected by a substantial patent estate, which I'll show you more about in a subsequent slide. Dr. Akulovich, Sasha, as we fondly know him, is a member of the foundation of the NIH Biomarker Consortium Steering Committees. This is a very high profile position. He's the only person in 3D genomics worldwide that is on that committee. All the things I've just told you about are because we've completed over 40 projects with using our 3D genomics platform with leading research institutions and big pharma today. And you can see some of the names of those collaborators at the bottom. So what is EpiSwitch all about? Many of you, as you followed the company and supported the company and been interested in the company, already know a lot about this. And I'm just going to boil it down to why this innovation has a whole market to build, and that's what we're about in these next several years. We know how and where to find the drivers of 3D gene regulation, and they're not down in the coding region of the genes which make the proteins. This is where NGS works. They're up here. They're in the chromosome conformation sequences, these 3D loops that control these different gene loci. But what's really important is that we link the phenotype expressed by that with clinical outcomes. And this leads us to have a very powerful modality that is blood-based. It characterizes the host response to disease. It's a direct measure of the network that is being regulated during the pathology of the disease. It's integrating your genetic state and the epigenetics, and it's boiled down to a binary actionable signal, as I'll show you in subsequent slides. So for 2021, we're growing the company. We're expanding beyond the pharma contracts and clinical trials work. Now, it's not to say we're leaving that behind. We're going to continue to work with our pharma partners. We're going to continue to be involved in clinical trials. This has slowed down considerably, as you can expect, during COVID, as people haven't been as mobile, they haven't been able to get to work in the same way, they haven't been able to go to see their doctors and be involved in clinical trials. But we are still actively involved. In fact, the ALS clinical trial that we've been working on with Mitsubishi was on hold, and in the last couple of months has come out of hold, and we're starting to receive samples again. But beyond that, what we're going to do is commercialize our pipeline of molecular diagnostic tests in the US. And you might say, well, wait a minute, John. I've been following OBD for years. What commercial pipeline are you talking about? Well, that's what I'm going to show you today. But let me just tell you how this has come about. When I looked at the company and its treasure chest of R&D and product development that it had done, I realized that the company was completely pregnant with product. And what I did in the first 100 days of my tenure as CEO was, with the team, mapped all of the projects into a product development pipeline so that we can see how mature each product was, how and when could it be deployed if possible. And what we've realized there at the top of that list was the universal IO response test, which I already talked about, and that was my flagship test to begin with. But then what we realized was, well, wait a minute, COVID has taken that away because nobody's really going to order a brand new test today. So the decision that we had to make as a company was, do we sit and wait out COVID 3, 6, 9 months, which is what we all thought back then? Or do we use our demonstrated, proven, reduced to practice technology and do something in COVID, something beyond detection, of which there are 600 detection tests on the market in the US alone, something that adds value. And a COVID severity test could do this. So we decided we'd do that, and in the next few slides, I'll show you about that. But the whole point is, as we mapped all of the possibilities, we realized that by partnering through US commercial labs, we can deliver tests. By establishing a US early adopter market with concierge physicians, we can set the table for the future clinical utility and recognition in the market. And this is an important point, because when you commercialize in the US, the experience that I have in the last 20 years and the team that I'm bringing to bear is that you don't just put something out there and say, please buy it. you have to prove that it's useful. And you have to prove that people value it and will pay for it. And the way to do this is to find an early adopter group that will do that. And while you generate your early revenues, you're generating the clinical evidence of utility and value, which you can then take to other parts of the market as you expand to the insurance companies, CMS, Medicare, to the US health systems for profit that look at what they will pay for tests and procedures based on clinical evidence. So this is what we're setting out to do. We are not leaving the R&D field behind, but what we're going to do is enable it. We're going to put out array kits and support them with our bioinformatic tools so that academics and biopharma R&D can buy those products and create their own 3D genome data, while we focus our R&D efforts to support our commercial partners, our pharma partners. We also want to raise our profile even further than the FNIH in the US by applying for government agency grants. This helps to push our technology to the forefront of a lot of people who understand where good technology gets used. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We're also using this opportunity to build our UK infrastructure so that we can support in the future biomarker development work with pharma, that we can support commercial clinical trial type work with pharma, that we can go ahead and do product development support for our own products. And of course, we're building out the US commercial team to drive sales and marketing across these multiple sales channels. And this is where we are. We're on the cusp of starting this and going to gain traction. So it's the hardest part of what we do, but you'll sell one test and then another test and you'll move on from there. And one of the things I should share with you is that the molecular diagnostics precision medicine market is all about samples. It's about samples to build your testing, to go ahead and make sure that you've got products that answer questions that are valuable. But it's also about capturing samples from physicians and from pharma development teams who will pay for those and generate you revenues. So the real change that I want you to take away from this is that we've taken our own destiny in our own hands, and we're not waiting to get samples given to us by pharma or through clinical trials. We're actually going out and finding our own samples. And this is the team that's driving that. You've are talking to me today, and we've talked a lot about Sasha. Paul Stockdale is our CFO, who knows us back to front for our financials. Tom Gill is my trusted COO, who I've worked with now for close to 15 years. What is it that I'm really talking about here in terms of molecular diagnostics? What I'm talking about are these two tests, which really are immune health tests, the EpiSwitch COVID test and the Universal IO test. So what we did was we turned our attention as a BD and marketing group and went and found the clinically annotated samples that would help us to build a test between June and December to address COVID severity and risk that is now ready and being tech transferred into US partner labs. And what we expect to do with this is initially target the 10 to 60 million individuals that cannot be addressed by the vaccine. Well, that's all well and good, but where's our adopter market? What does that look like? Well, starting in October, we started to commission primary market research and voice of customer studies to find out where the sweet spot for early adopters would be in the US. And the answer that's come out of that is the concierge medicine market. Now, I know a lot of you watching today have never heard of this Totally understand. What I can say to you is that it's very similar to private clinics in the UK. However, it's very well developed and accepted as a business model in the US. There are now 12,000 physicians in the US that see up to 10 million patients annually. And you can say, well, wait a minute, who are these patients? These are the patients who will pay for their own care without insurance. These are the people who will take control of their own health care. As you know, it's very expensive in the US, and go and see a doctor that will give them more time and customized medicines and preventative measures for them as they move forward. What's interesting about this is so well established that this market over the last 5 to 10 years has grown to be a $3.6 billion market in the US for healthcare that is starting to grow with an annual growth of about 6%. It's a very good place for us to go to get early adoption of our testing, both the COVID testing and the IO testing, as I'll show you on the commercial plan rollout. On this next slide, I just want to make sure that you understand that the R&D tools market for us means that we're going to put the 3D genome biomarker discovery that we do in a box and sell that to the academic labs and to the biopharma labs R&D, and support that with access to the analytical tools in our portal. Also, as I've talked about with the US grant applications, I wanted to highlight we have 2 right now that have passed the second round or in the final round that we should hear about before Easter. One is with the National Institute of Health, Mental Health Division, and one is with the Department of Defense. The first one is for autism, and the second one is for scleroderma. These are projects that we would work on anyway. If we can get some funding for these, it will actually help to defray those costs. There's no saying that we will, but also just by applying them, it increases the profile of our company and our technology. So how was this immune health for COVID severity test built? Well, basically there's 3 layers, and I want to run you through them pretty quickly. First of all, there's the EpiSwitch molecular diagnostics platform that is built now into an automated product development process. And if you start at stage 1 with clinically annotated, severe, mild, moderate, and asymptomatic samples, you can put them on our arrays, which we interrogate up to 1 million 3D genomic regulatory markers with, and you can start to see how these separate between the severe and the non-severe. You can then refine this in our automated process and then translate it into qPCR. You start to see the separation between the groups. You validate this through a blind validation on independent cohorts, and we've now done this on 2 cohorts, down to the marker set of between 5 and 15 markers in this now qPCR modality that on this waterfall plot, you can see clearly show you who's severe risk and who's low risk, and with this type of performance data. On this next slide, you can see that indeed the test we've built and are mobilizing through tech transfer as we speak identifies the risk of severe outcome to COVID with high accuracy, 92%. You can see on this linear determinants plot that severes group all together, no outliers, nothing in between. The milds group, the asymptomatics group. This is in progress to be a manuscript in bioRxiv very, very soon. What I'm showing you on the right-hand side here is the result of our primary research and voice of customer with over 140 healthcare providers and some of their patients. And The benefits of the test that they are highlighting when we talk to them are that this test can help to manage the uncertainty of daily life during COVID, that we can identify who's at highest risk. That helps to determine who should continue to shelter and take extra precautions, and can enable confidence for the 4 out of 5 people in the population that will be low risk to return to work or school while taking the necessary precautions to protect everybody. The physicians in this panel are basically telling us that understanding your risk of severe response with respect to hospitalization is very important for people's good mental health, to drive daily behaviors that help everybody, and should you become infected, to assist a physician when making the right decisions for you. But how do you deliver this critical information? Well, you need to do it in a very clear, concise, and succinct report. Remember that the physician orders the test on behalf of the patient and then gets the result. The physician needs to be able to look at the report in milliseconds, tell what's going on, and be able to communicate to their patient what's happening, what their risk level is. What I'm addressing in this slide are the large number of people who will not be vaccinated in the US. Where we come up with that number of a potential 10 to 60 million people that will not be vaccinated and may be able to use this test. 10 million of them are the immunocompromised and immunosuppressed that can never be given a vaccine. What's interesting here is in this market research I'm showing in the bottom of this panel, only 60% of Americans said they would get a vaccine for corona if offered it. And this is due to safety concerns over the way that it was quickly built, the adverse reactions that people have seen to it, the fact that the way it's being rolled out doesn't give them a lot of confidence into whether it's 1 shot they're getting, 2 shots they're getting, is it 3 months later, what's happening? And this is despite the fact that 71% of US adults think that the worst of the coronavirus is still to come. And we are seeing that we only have 15% or so of the population exposed right now, and we're still getting record numbers of hospitalizations. Now, the 39% of adults who said they wouldn't get the vaccine, when pushed further, 18% of them say it doesn't matter what you tell me, I am not going to get the vaccine. And these are not the mad anti-vaxxers. There are not 46 million of those. These are the people that just don't believe it's safe. So you have to ask yourself, how are they going to figure out what's going on with themselves? Is this severity test going to be able to help them? It definitely will. And not only that, but myself, people I know, my neighbors, we want to know. And we're not in these groups. So the point is that there's a significant market of people, and our market research is telling us there's a significant appetite for this with our early adopter physicians and with the population that needs something other than a vaccine. So what's the commercial plan? And obviously a plan is a plan, it's written down and you start to execute. Well, we are executing. And our tech transfer is underway with our partner labs. Our sales and marketing is underway. Our publication should come out soon, within a week or so, and really underpin what's going on in our collateral. Will allow us to launch by the end of the month and start to grow that early adopter market and then go on beyond that. We're going to concentrate for the first 2 quarters on that. And then in the second half of the year, we'll start to think about tech transferring our universal IO test. Now, the reason for this is because we're starting to see an appetite for that test to come back. We're starting to see clinical trials start up. We're starting to see patients have a safer, easier way to go and see their physicians, and especially for cancer patients to go get treated. So a test that allows a physician to say to themselves, Well, I've just seen that patient, and that patient could be a candidate for one of these checkpoint inhibitor IO drugs. I know that only 30% of people respond to those. There's this test, and it's a blood test, and that can give me and the patient some confidence to know that they're on a drug that they'll respond to, or if it shows that they won't respond to it, I can go and give them something that they're more likely to respond to. Of course, we are also assembling these RUO kits in the UK to send out to our academic and biopharma R&D people. Our chief data officer, Ewan Hunter, has been in this business, has done this. This was what he did before he came to us. So we have expertise. We've done this as well, myself and my chief operation officer, with tools for the R&D market in the past. On the next slide, I want to remind everybody about the market that we're really looking to get into in the US. And this is the molecular diagnostics market, which was valued at $8.3 billion in 2019 with a 9% CAGR. We play in the PCR segment, we play in the infectious disease segment, and we play in the blood screening area. This is good news for us, and the pipeline mapping that I told you about at the beginning of the talk really has led us to not only have COVID test, which we built ourselves 6 months, and an IO flagship that we can put into the market in 2021, but we have a list of 10 others that we have ready to go. The rheumatoid arthritis test that was built at the University of Glasgow with Pfizer that predicts response to methotrexate. The ALS test, which in the UK is known as motor neurone disease, is currently being used in the Mitsubishi test. It's just restarted. There will be other opportunities, of course. And multiple sclerosis is a test we have built. There are multiple oncology tests. I would call your attention to the prostate test, which there's a gap in the market for this right now. Traditionally, prostate-specific antigen, or PSA, has been used, but it's not a great biomarker, and there's lots of inaccurate data out there that's being given to physicians. So a lot of publications have been panning it. There's a need for something else. And I can show you on this slide right here, on Thursday, we published the data from the study that we did with Imperial College London. And we have a test that in peripheral blood can detect prostate cancer and stratify disease risk. So, and one that's just waiting to be taken forward. And then at the bottom of this, you see the veterinary medicine category, where we have a lymphoma test for dogs. There are other tests that obviously can be turned towards pets. The veterinary medicine market, at least in the US, is basically concierge medicine for pets, where if your pet does get ill, does need treatment or a test, that's going to be paid out of pocket by the pet owner and is not subject to going through all of the rigmarole of insurance reimbursement. On this slide, I wanted to just tell you about how we have protected all of the things I've told you about through an international intellectual property portfolio that, yes, it really does control the 3D genomics space through the dominating claims we have to the core technology and the claims that we specifically tailor to clinical applications. And our IP team, both in the UK and in the US, assure me that I'm fine to say this. Otherwise, I would not be saying it. We also have our trade secrets very well locked up. Our manufacturing know-how from over 10 years of doing this continues to get pushed forward, and our branding and trademark. So in summary then, we're growing into 2021, we're expanding beyond pharma contracts and clinical trials work, but not leaving it behind. We're commercializing our pipeline of tests in the US by partnering, establishing US early adopters, and setting the table for the future. We're enabling R&D in the hands of other academics and research groups. We are raising our profile through US government agency grant applications. We have committed to building up the infrastructure in the in the UK in order to support these commercial activities. And we're building out in the US a commercial team to drive the sales and marketing into the early adopter markets. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you for your attention, and try to answer whatever questions you have.
Thank you very much, John, for that. I'm going to start the Q&A session by just reminding you, if you do want to ask a question, there's a box at the bottom of your screen. Please type your question in there. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can. There's a few coming ahead of time, and we've had a few coming through the webinar itself. So type your questions in there, and I will ask those questions to John. So the first one, John, is to ask you about what or when do you expect to announce the results of the Glasgow Refine COVID project, and what is the relevance for shareholders and the time for monetization?
Right. So I just want to make sure that the audience understands that there are two clinical trials that we've publicized that we're involved in. One is the Glasgow Get a Fix COVID trial, which is, we are one of the biomarker arms. And the other one is the Mitsubishi ALS Refine trial. So I'm going to assume that we're talking actually about the Glasgow Get a Fix COVID trial. And I can tell you that we press released that in April as we were being brought on board. That trial didn't start until the 26th of October, and it's still underway. And as the biomarker arm of that trial, we are completely dependent on receiving those samples as the clinical trial has gone along, and doing those readouts and working with that trial. To date, we have not completed that. What we have done, though, is we've taken our own destiny in our own hands and said, okay, we understand that clinical trials take a long time, and we're still involved in that. But we've built our own severity test. Now, let me make sure that people understand what that means is the number of samples that would come out of the Glasgow Get a Fix for us would only be one cohort's worth to do something with. And since it would take a long time, we've preempted that as a commercial company and used our abilities to build a severity test, which now could be used to look at the Glasgow cohort when those samples are available, and they haven't been available yet, but also for us to commercialize going forward.
Okay, thank you, John. That's a good introduction to a series of questions we've got on the COVID severity tests, and I'm going to read them out to you now. So for the COVID severity test, is this considered to be unique, and what has been the reaction to it by relevant industry parties? How do you plan to distribute it in the US? You mentioned the concierge market, and is this distribution in place and ready to go? How much will you charge for the test? And there's one last question on the test, which is, do you need FDA approval pre-commercialization?
Great. So I think that's at least 5 or 6 questions, right, Alex? So if you would do me the favor of, if I forget one, reminding me, okay?
I'll come back to you, John, if you do.
Why don't we start with the FDA approval? I think that's a very important thing. And that over the years has been a lot of misunderstanding in the US market, and I'm sure outside of that, with what does the FDA regulate and what do they not regulate, especially in relation to lab developed tests. And actually during COVID, what we saw a clarification of that by Human Health Services and a streamlining of what's happening there. And suffice it to say then that the FDA does have regulation of what we call class 1, class 2, class 3 tests for, or medical devices actually, in the US market. Lab developed tests, that is what we are actually working with, that are run in CAP clear labs, are not regulated by the FDA. They're regulated, and this was the clarification that came out of the White House through HHS. They're regulated by the Clear Amendments Act that is part of the Code of Federal Regulation 21, which is a quality management system that is audited and overseen by the College of American Pathologists. So CAP clear labs need to run an analytical validation of a test that shows that the result they're getting is true at an analytical level. They also need to run it in a laboratory that has a clear certificate, which means that they adhere to a particular quality management system. Now, how can we take advantage of that ourselves as a UK core? We can, because we run a quality management system that is called MD-SAP, and it's also under ISO 9000 and ISO 13384, sorry. Those are equivalents across Anglo-American pond, as we call it, right? And so by working with a lab, they can transfer our tech onto the hardware, which is hardware that everybody uses to do qPCR. Run a set of samples to get equivalency to what we have, show that validation under the QMS, and self-certify to be ready for an audit by College of American Pathologists, not the FDA. I hope that that makes it clear on what's going on there. There was another question here that was asked about, and I think it was about the relevance to pharma partners, etc.
Yes, well, I guess what's been the reaction by relevant industry partners?
So it's a great question. As part of our primary market research, we've had an awful lot of positive reaction to this. It is one of those things, though, where it's all about the sales and marketing. People can see it as a good idea, but how does it get rolled out? Who does that? Who would use it? And that's exactly why you have to find that early adopter market. That's exactly why you have to get people using it and paying for it, right? And get that evidence that, yeah, on paper it's a great idea, but actually, boots on the ground, it's a good idea. People are using this. Now, that's one of the reasons why we've looked at the appetite of the concierge physicians, who their job is to bring the latest and greatest to their clients. The trust that they have with their client, who's paying them a fee to go out and advise them on what is it that can help me. Within COVID, what we've seen, and you saw it on the slides, is that there are many benefits that they see, and there's a large appetite for it. Now, I want to roll that in with, well, what will you charge for that test? That's a naughty question, as you know, because I'm not allowed to tell you that on this sort of forum. However, what I can tell you is it is a test price that will be set by the US market. And as we talk through these contracts, get these contracts signed up with the labs, and we talk to the concierge physicians who are actually selling this, we are finding that there is a decent price point on this that is good for everybody, and that it can be good for a larger market of people. So what I mean by that is we're not going to be selling a test for $5,000 that only a few people can get, because there's millions of people that potentially need this, and they don't need to be shut out of a market. what we can do is get a reasonable cost for it, so that when those health systems, for example, for profit come along, and they say, we have 20 million covered lives, we would like to work with you on the pricing so that we can get it out to people. We're in a place where we can have those conversations, move that stuff along.
Perfect, John. I've got one more follow-up question on the COVID severity test. Is what are the outstanding uncertainties around the launch of the COVID severity test in the US? And when do you think you'll have removed those uncertainties? And will the UK, or is the UK government interested in this test?
Yeah, so there's always a lot of execution uncertainties and risk to these sorts of things, right? The nice thing about this is I'm working with partners that I've worked with before that know me and my US team and have bought into this type of testing and are willing to give us some of their testing capacity and to do the tech transfer parts of it relatively at risk as they go along. One of the risks that isn't there is that there is enough product to go around, because we're using qPCR testing, which is easy to get just about anywhere. We're also using the qPCR lines, which can easily be flipped over. I would say that the biggest uncertainty for me is, when do I sell the first test? Because one leads to two, leads to another, right? That's what I'm really looking for right now. Not trying to put the cart before the horse, because you sell the first one, you sell another one, and believe it or not, the first one is really significant, not because of revenue, but because that's the first piece of evidence that shows that you can sell it. It's the hardest thing with a diagnostic test is selling it, the first one or two. Now, in terms of the UK government, we have been talking to various groups around the UK. It does not look like it's going, it's just like with the insurance people in the US, they want hard evidence that it's being used before they'll use it. Kind of chicken and the egg. In the UK, it's going to be the same thing, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a UK private clinic market that we can go to seed that conversation and to start that ball rolling. In fact, we have plans in place that are happening with that right now.
Okay, thank you, John. We're going to move on to a slightly different topic here. OBD previously marketed itself to investors as seeking to use its technology to assist Big Pharma to make drug development more efficient and thus to benefit from big licensing agreements. Is this still an ambition?
It is. It's more than an ambition. I think we've gone a long way to it. The thing about the sales cycle for that is that it is a lot longer than one might think sometimes. And COVID has definitely abrogated that timeline. What's also happening is that priorities, pharma's are really interesting beasts. I've worked for them inside and out. Priorities change all the time. Things speed up, slow down, etc. That pushing someone's pharma development pipeline along is something which takes a lot of patience and a lot of data. You're continually convincing the inside champions and influencers to keep these things moving. Now, what I will say is that we will continue to do this as the pharma market starts to figure out what it needs to do outside. I mean, as the pandemic comes along and once we get to the end of it. But we have been sustained during this year to a large extent by the MSA that we put in place with a large pharma, where we've been running through those samples. And I can tell you, we had hundreds of samples delivered. And the way it works with them is that you work through the first 50 or 100, and then you go and look at what it is with them. And our bioinformatics team has spent hours going through this with them, making sure they want to go to that next level. So it's not like, here's a sample, goes through a cycle and it has to be built. And the opportunity for licensing technology and getting milestones comes near the end, where clinical development is coming to fruition, where a drug is looking like it's in phase 2, phase 3, and will need a marker to push its sales in the market, to convince the FDA, etc. A lot of those projects aren't there yet, and if they were on the cusp of it, they're on hold. They've been slowed down.
Okay, thank you. Would the prostate cancer test require regulatory approval? And if so, how long would that be likely to take?
So all the tests that are in that pipeline that I showed you can be mobilized initially as an LDT and maybe forever. Where they become needed to be regulated by the FDA is if, for example, and this is where we kind of get to have our cake and eat it sometimes, is if a pharma sees, and this is exactly why I want the IO test on the market, when a pharma sees that there's a test that they can just go order, pay for, and tell that they can put this person in a clinical trial or not, that's where we'll get a lot of use of tests. Now on the prostate test, we put that test into an LDT. Physicians can go and start ordering that instead of PSA. Now, will it need to go through insurance? Maybe. Will there be an initial market for, say, the concierge medicine market? Absolutely. Why is that? That's because many of the people who use the concierge medicine market, maybe I should take a drink, is they're in their 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th decade of life. They're the people that are more likely to need that test, to see that. They're going to pay for that up front. While you don't go from 0 tests to 1 million tests overnight. You don't do that actually in less than a few years, believe me. But to get some substantial number of tests coming through, to get that clinical evidence, you can do that with the LDT tests in the concierge market and then keep going at the market. And you can spend, that then allows you to have longevity in the market and keep adding to the market.
Okay. You reference a plan to launch predictive immune response profiling. Please, can you describe the nature of this opportunity and the potential commercial magnitude and timing?
Yeah, so let's just get everybody on the same page here. Here is the data for the Universal Immuno-Oncology Response Test. And let me just show you really briefly what it is, and I can try and answer this question for you. If you look on the left-hand side here, what you see here is, this is the data from the actual pharma company based on their patients and who had a partial response to the drug and who really didn't have much response at all. And in the middle, this is the data from a PD-L1 IHC test. PD-L1 is the target of the checkpoint inhibitors, of which there are several that this test can talk about. And you can see that no matter what you do with this test, and it's FDA approved, you cannot tell who's going to respond better than anybody else. Our test, which is right here, can tell you, and almost in parallel with what the outcome data here from the clinical trial was, who's responding and who's not. And this is why it stratifies people either into a response bucket or a non-response bucket. This predictive test is very valuable because even if you look at I've covered it up for myself, but I'll try and move this. If you see, there's multiple drugs and multiple different types of cancer in here that can be addressed. And this isn't being sold to a drug company. This will be ordered through the LDT lab by a doctor who thinks their patient may be eligible for an anti-PD-1 or anti-PD-L1 checkpoint inhibitor drug. And by getting the result of that test, because it's predictive, it will give them confidence to either give it to them if they're on the red or not give it to them if they're on the black. Now, with that as a background, what we're able to do with that then is sell that into doctors' offices. We, as I said, would begin to do that through the concierge, because that's where a lot of people who need these sorts of tests are showing up, and then move it more out into the mainstream once the clinical evidence for use and the clinical evidence for value and price point have been established. Tests that think that they can do this are on the market now, list price for $6,000, and have an average sales price of around $2,500, and they can't give you this result. So there is value here, and we've had a lot of industry insiders and clinicians recognize that value, which is why I'm confident that when the market for the clinicians to need to use the test comes back end of this year, we will start to be able to get some traction. Hence, we're going to try and launch.
Thank you, John. I think we've got time for just a couple more, and apologies, we haven't been able to get through all the questions, but just the two quick ones at the end. When would an individual be able to travel to the US to a clinic and get a blood diagnostic test report?
I don't know about that. I mean, that's such a loaded question, right? I mean, when can you get on an airplane? I don't know. I mean, the better way to do it would be to do it through a private clinic in the UK, who maybe they send the blood to the US and it gets sent back again. It's a very, very good question from that point of view, because I definitely wouldn't tell people to be mobile. Being mobile during the pandemic is one of the biggest risk factors, because you cannot control what you're coming into contact with. So I would suggest staying however you have successfully been able to social distance. But I would also suggest keeping your eye on, if we can get this into the hands of UK private clinic, then you could get the test that way. And that's probably a safe way to do it. That's not happening today, but I guess now you've prompted me to make sure that the UK market knows when it is available.
Okay,
John, maybe I can interrupt. Maybe the question was a bit more theoretical. When do you expect the first test to be available in the States?
You know, that's probably true, Matthew. I'm a straight talker, so if you ask me a question, ask it straight. I expect it to be available by the end of Q1.
Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, John. And the last question I'm going to ask you here is, can you provide us with some more regular updates on the progress of the Master Service Agreement, the Mitsubishi work, and now the launch of the COVID Severity Test? Information has been a bit sparse over the last year.
Yeah, I understand that there's been a little bit of a sparsity of information. I will say that what you're seeing with me as a CEO and Matthew as a chairman and as a team is that we will endeavor to give you as much information as we can as we have it. But if we don't have it, we can't give it to you. And around the MSA, it's moved relatively slowly. You've seen that the money that we have taken in, it's been recognized. You've seen also that we have gone ahead and got the refine going again. I expect, though, that now that we have built our test and we have some momentum, that we'll be making an awful lot more PR, and also putting things out on social media. And what we're also going to do, I think, which should help everybody, is we're going to be boiling this all down so that it's, You don't have to be an expert to figure out what's going on. And what I mean by that is, you've seen all these great slides that we have with double helices and chromatin and all the rest of it. That's fantastic. We're going to animate some of that. We're going to start making it more user-friendly. So both at the level of the investor, where I understand you need information to make decisions, and at the level of the potential user and informing the rest of the market about how do we actually do that so well.
Brilliant. John and Matthew, thank you very much for presenting today. It's been really appreciated, and thank you for covering as many questions as you could in the time you had available. A recording of this webinar will be posted on the Yellowstone Advisory website in the next day or two if you wanted to catch up on any points. And as you leave the webinar today, there will be a short survey to complete, and if you would spend a few moments completing that, that would be very much appreciated. So thank you very much for attending today, and we hope to see you all soon.